The hammer of the blacksmith struck iron with a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat, echoing across the quiet Texas settlement. His life was plain: mend wagons, shoe horses, keep the forge burning. Folks in town called him the silent blacksmith, not because he was cruel, but because he kept words locked away like secrets too heavy to carry. Silence was easier than remembering the war, easier than hearing again the cries of men dying in the mud. That evening, as the last embers of daylight bled into night, the blacksmith prepared to shutter his forge. Then he heard it, a faint sound, fragile, broken. He turned, and from the shadows stepped a figure no taller than his anvil. A girl. Navajo. Her braids were loose, her jewelry glinted weakly, and her dress hung in tatters. Blood marked her side. She swayed once, twice, then crumpled into the dirt at his boots. For a long breath, the blacksmith stood frozen. Everyone knew what it meant for a wounded Indian child to appear at a white man's forge. It meant danger. If her people found her here, they would come with fury. If the townsfolk found her, they would call him a traitor, accuse him of bringing death to their doors. The safer choice was clear: shut the door, let the desert claim her. But when he bent down and lifted her small frame, he knew he had already chosen otherwise. Her skin burned with fever, her breath came ragged. He carried her to his cot, tore strips of linen, and pressed them to the wound. His hands, built to bend steel, trembled as they stitched torn flesh. Hours passed, her groans filled the silence. Still, she clung to life. When dawn crept over the horizon, the blacksmith stepped outside. The air was heavy, too heavy for a morning. Then he heard it, low and distant at first, then swelling like thunder. Hooves. Dozens. Dust rose on the horizon. Out of it came a line of horsemen, faces painted, weapons flashing. Not a handful, an army. 70 Navajo warriors moving as one, their chants riding the wind. At their head rode a man scarred across the cheek, his eyes hard as flint. His gaze locked on the forge. Inside, the girl still slept, chest rising and falling with fragile life. Outside, the earth shook with war. There was no road left but forward. The blacksmith stood rooted at the doorway of his forge, watching as the war party descended. Dust curled around the horses' hooves, the sun flashing across blades and painted shields. Each rider sat tall, their faces carved from stone, eyes sharp and searching. The line of warriors fanned out, circling the yard until the forge was surrounded. Not a shout, not a war cry, only silence more dangerous than noise. The blacksmith could feel their judgment pressing on him like the weight of iron. The scarred leader urged his horse forward. The animal's breath steamed in the morning chill as it halted a few paces from the blacksmith. The man's gaze was unyielding, the kind that could cut a soul in two. He spoke in a low voice, words rolling like gravel. Though the blacksmith did not understand every syllable, the meaning was clear. Where is she? Inside the forge, the girl stirred weakly, her groans carrying into the air. The warriors' heads turned as one. A ripple of tension ran through the circle, hands tightening on spears and bows. The blacksmith raised a hand, not in threat but in plea. He stepped aside from the door as if to say, "She lives. She is safe here." His heart hammered, but his face remained stone. The scarred leader dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the dirt. He advanced until only the morning light separated them. His eyes flicked past the blacksmith to the doorway where the girl lay. For a moment, the world held its breath. The warriors did not move. The settlers in town, hearing the thunder of hooves, kept their distance. Even the wind seemed to die. Then the scarred man spoke again, this time in broken English. "You take my blood." It was not a question, it was an accusation. The blacksmith's jaw tightened. He could say nothing to ease the storm. His silence, once his shield, now became a weapon. He met the scarred man's gaze and did not look away. The leader's hand hovered near his knife. The circle of warriors leaned forward on their saddles, ready to strike at a single command. And inside, the girl gave a cry, sharp, pained, alive. Every eye turned toward the forge. The blacksmith knew the next heartbeat could decide everything. Mercy or massacre? The scarred leader stood so close the blacksmith could see the pale seam of the wound that cut across his cheek, a scar earned in some old battle. His eyes were fire and judgment, but beneath that flame burned something heavier. Fear. Not fear of the blacksmith, but fear for the girl. The blacksmith shifted his stance, squaring his shoulders. He said nothing. He had learned long ago that words were as fragile as glass in the wrong hands. Instead, he raised one palm slowly, keeping it open. Empty. Then he turned slightly toward the forge, motioning with a nod. The scarred man's nostrils flared. He barked something in Navajo, and two younger warriors slid from their saddles. They moved with panther grace, approaching the doorway. The blacksmith's body tensed, but he did not move aside. If they rushed in, they might kill the girl by mistake, thinking she was already gone. Instead, he took a step back, then pointed to the cot where she lay. The warriors paused, glanced at their leader. The scarred man gave a curt nod. With bow still in hand, they peered inside. One muttered in surprise, then another. The girl was breathing, weak, shallow, but alive. A murmur spread through the circle of riders. The blacksmith caught fragments of words he did not know, but the tone was unmistakable. Confusion, disbelief. They had expected to find her body, not her life. The scarred leader spoke again, this time slowly, as if forcing the English from his tongue. "You help her?" The blacksmith's throat felt dry as sand. He gave a single sharp nod. For the first time, the scarred man's hand drifted away from his knife. He studied the blacksmith's face, searching for deceit. Then he turned toward his men and barked another command. Half the circle lowered their weapons, the other half did not. The tension was a rope pulled taut between them. One wrong move, one twitch of a finger, and it would snap, lashing death across the yard. The scarred man stepped closer, lowering his voice until only the blacksmith could hear. "She is daughter of war chief." The word struck harder than any fist. The girl was not just a child, she was the blood of a leader, the heart of an entire people. That meant her survival could spark peace, or her death could ignite a war that would drown the land in fire. The blacksmith let the weight of it settle in his chest. He had chosen to save her life, but in doing so, he had stepped into a storm he could not escape. Behind the scarred man, warriors waited for the signal to ride either toward peace or slaughter, and all of it balanced on the thin thread of the girl's breath. Inside the forge, the air was thick with the scent of smoke and iron, but beneath it lingered the raw tang of blood. The girl shifted on the cot, her face twisted in pain. A low whimper escaped her lips, and the sound sliced through the silence outside like a knife. Every warrior's head snapped toward the doorway. The scarred leader stiffened, his eyes narrowing. The blacksmith turned slightly, shielding the opening with his body. For a heartbeat, he thought the warriors might surge forward, weapons raised, overwhelming him. But then the girl's voice broke through, hoarse and fragile. She called out a single word, one the blacksmith didn't understand, but the Navajo men did. It was a name carried on a daughter's breath. The scarred leader froze. His jaw clenched, his hands trembled. Slowly, he stepped past the blacksmith and into the forge. The warriors outside bristled, unsure, but none dared stop him. Inside, the man knelt beside the girl. The blacksmith stayed in the shadows, watching. The scarred man's harsh face seemed to soften as the girl's weak hand brushed his sleeve. She whispered again, her words cracked but clear enough. She had been taken, wounded, left for dead. And the blacksmith had saved her. The leader bowed his head, resting his forehead briefly against hers. Then he rose, turning to face the blacksmith. For a long moment, their eyes locked, iron meeting flint. The blacksmith expected rage or perhaps a command for his death. Instead, the scarred man gave a short nod. "Not thanks, not yet, but something close enough." Outside, the circle of warriors grew restless. They wanted blood or answers, maybe both. The scarred man stepped out, raising one hand to silence them. He barked an order, and the warriors shifted, pulling their horses back a few paces. The noose around the forge loosened, though not by much. The blacksmith exhaled, the weight in his chest easing only slightly. The girl had bought him time, but not safety. The scarred leader turned back. His English came ragged but sharp enough to cut. "You save her life. Now. You keep her alive. Or war comes." The words struck heavier than any threat. This was no bargain. It was a sentence. The girl's life was now his burden, his responsibility, and his danger. The warriors lingered at the edge of the yard, their painted faces unreadable. Their spears still gleamed in the morning sun, and the blacksmith knew. If the girl's breathing faltered, if death took her under his roof, it would not only be her blood spilled on this soil, it would be his. By midday, the forge stood in uneasy quiet. The war party lingered on the ridge outside, their horses shifting, their eyes fixed like vultures circling a battlefield. The scarred leader had left a handful of men to keep watch while he rode with the rest, perhaps to consult with elders or prepare for what came next. The blacksmith tended the girl's wound with water gone lukewarm, pressing cloth to slow the seep of blood. She stirred often now, murmuring words in her own tongue. Though he could not understand her, the sound told him she was fighting to live, and so long as she fought, he could not lay down his burden. But silence cannot keep secrets forever. By the afternoon, whispers had already reached the town. At first it was children running breathless through the street. Indians at the forge. Then came the adults, faces pale, voices sharp with fear. In the saloon, men slammed their cards to the table and cursed the blacksmith's name. In the mercantile, women whispered of raids and fire. By evening, a knot of townsfolk gathered outside the forge. They kept their distance, just far enough to avoid the gaze of the Navajo sentries watching from the ridge, but close enough for their words to reach the blacksmith's ears. "You've brought war to our doorstep," one man shouted, his rifle slung across his chest. "Send her back before they burn us all," a woman cried, clutching her child's hand. "He's hiding one of them. Might as well paint a target on the whole town." The blacksmith stepped into the doorway, his frame filling the threshold. His hands were empty, but the soot on his arms, the heat in his eyes made him look as unyielding as the iron he forged. He said nothing. He had no words to offer them. The sheriff arrived last, pushing through the crowd with the weight of authority. His badge caught the light of the setting sun. He looked at the townsfolk, then at the blacksmith, and finally at the ridge where the warriors waited. "This can't hold," the sheriff said low, more to himself than anyone else. Then louder, "You've taken her in. That makes her your responsibility, but it makes this town your battlefield too." The crowd murmured, angry and afraid. The sheriff raised a hand, silencing them. His gaze fixed hard on the blacksmith. "You'd better decide where your loyalties lie, Smith. With us, or with them." The blacksmith did not answer. Inside, the girl coughed, a sharp, rattling sound that silenced the night. Every ear heard it, every heart tightened. And in that sound was the truth. Her fate would decide not just the blacksmith's life, but the peace or ruin of the entire settlement. Night pressed down on the settlement like a heavy shroud. The forge glowed faintly, its light a warning as much as a beacon. Outside, the watchful silhouettes of Navajo warriors remained on the ridge, patient and silent. Inside town, the saloon was alive with restless voices. The sheriff had called a meeting. Men filled the room, their boots scraping the floorboards, their voices sharp as drawn knives. On the table lay a lantern, casting long shadows across faces lined with fear. "We can't hold like this," a rancher spat. "Every day that girl stays under his roof, we get closer to war. My cattle are out there, my family's here. What happens when those savages decide to ride down?" Another man slammed his fist on the table. "We take her back. Leave her where they can find her. That ends it." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. He had fought enough gunfights to know the danger wasn't only outside, it was inside this room, brewing hot and reckless. Meanwhile, in the forge, the blacksmith listened to the girl's shallow breathing. Her fever still burned, but her strength flickered brighter with each passing hour. He wiped her brow with a damp cloth, his hands steady even as his mind churned. A knock came at the door, not the heavy fist of a mob, but the measured rap of authority. The sheriff stepped in, hat low, eyes heavy. "They want her gone," the sheriff said flatly. "The town's on edge. Every man out there's got his rifle polished and loaded. They'll come knocking before long and I won't be able to hold them back." The blacksmith met his gaze in silence. The sheriff sighed. "You saved her. That counts for something. But the folks here don't see a life saved. They see a war waiting. You've got to think on it. If keeping her is worth burning this whole place down." For a moment, the only sound was the girl's weak cough. Then the sheriff added, voice low, "I can buy you one night. After that, I can't promise which side of the door I'll be standing on." He tipped his hat, turned, and left the forge. The blacksmith stood in the glow of the embers, torn between two fires. Outside, the Navajo warriors demanding his word. Inside, the town ready to spill his blood. And in the middle of it all, the girl slept, her fate chained to his. The night was black and brittle, the kind of silence where every sound cracked too loud. The blacksmith sat by the forge, the girl resting behind him, her breath shallow but steady. He had not slept. His hammer lay within reach, not as a weapon, but as a reminder of the life he had chosen. Then came the sound. Footsteps, more than one. A murmur of voices, low and urgent. The crunch of boots on dirt. He rose slowly, stepping to the doorway. Lanterns bobbed in the darkness, their glow revealing faces set with anger. At least a dozen townsfolk, rifles slung and pistols drawn. At their head was the rancher who had shouted loudest at the saloon. His eyes burned with the kind of fear that dressed itself as courage. "Step aside, Smith," the rancher growled. "We'll take the girl and leave her where she belongs. You know it's the only way." The blacksmith's jaw tightened. He said nothing, but his frame filled the doorway like a wall of stone. The rancher lifted his rifle. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You put us all in danger by keeping her here. One man's burden shouldn't cost a whole town its life." Behind the rancher, the others shifted uneasily. Some avoided the blacksmith's stare, their grip on their guns less sure. They weren't killers, they were farmers, merchants, men with families. But fear had twisted them into something dangerous. Inside, the girl stirred, coughing weakly. The sound drew the mob's attention. The rancher sneered. "Listen to her, she's half dead anyway. Better we end this before more blood spilled." The blacksmith's hands curled into fists. He stepped forward, his shadow stretching in the lantern light. For a moment, no one breathed. Then from the ridge came a sound that froze every heart. The war cry of Navajo warriors. Lanterns shook in trembling hands. The townsfolk turned, rifles swinging toward the darkness. Outlines of mounted figures appeared on the hill, torches blazing, eyes glinting like predators in the night. The blacksmith stood unmoving, but his message was clear. If the mob stepped forward, they would not only face him, they would face 70 warriors waiting for the excuse to ride. The rancher's face went pale. His rifle dipped. Behind him, men muttered prayers. The war party had not attacked yet. They only watched, waiting. The balance held on the knife's edge. One breath, one trigger, one spark could burn the night into war. And in the center of it all stood the blacksmith. The girl's life in his hands, and the fate of the town hanging by a thread. The night bled into firelight as the Navajo riders pressed closer, their torches flickering against painted faces. The ridge was no longer a shadow. It was a wall of warriors, their chants rumbling like thunder across the valley. The townsfolk froze. Rifles that had moments ago pointed toward the forge now shook in unsteady hands. Mothers pulled their children from the street. The sheriff appeared, pushing through the crowd, his face grim as stone. "Put your guns down," he barked. "All of you." The mob hesitated, caught between fear of their sheriff and fear of the men on the ridge. The rancher spat, his voice hoarse. "We can't fight 70 warriors, but we can't just let them take her either." The sheriff's gaze cut to the blacksmith standing in the forge's doorway. "This started with you," he said. "Now it's your choice how it ends." The blacksmith said nothing. His silence was iron, his stare unflinching. He looked at the girl behind him, pale but alive, then back to the torches burning on the ridge. The scarred leader broke from the line of horsemen, riding down toward the forge. His men followed like a tide. When his horse halted in the yard, the weight of 70 warriors settled over the town like a storm. He dismounted, torchlight dancing across his scar. His voice came low, steady, in broken English. "She lives because of you. But trust is not given. Trust must be tested." The blacksmith's jaw tightened. The meaning was clear. If she lived under his care, the town would stand. If she died, vengeance would follow. The sheriff's hand hovered near his revolver, but his eyes pleaded otherwise. "Smith," he muttered, "whatever you decide, decide now. Lives or hanging." The blacksmith glanced once more at the girl's fragile frame, then at the scarred leader. His choice was no longer about her alone. It was about the line between peace and bloodshed. Around him, the mob waited, breathless. Behind him, the forge glowed faint, as though the fire itself held its breath. He stepped forward. One step into the circle of torches. One step toward the man who could unleash war with a single word. The air cracked with silence, and with it came the weight of a choice that would burn itself into legend. If you're gripped by this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. because what happens next will change everything. The forge became a council chamber, though no one had planned it so. The blacksmith's anvil stood like an altar between two worlds. On one side, townsfolk clutching rifles, on the other, Navajo warriors gripping spears. The fire snapped and hissed, casting sparks that drifted into the charged air. The scarred leader stood tall, his shadow cutting across the room. The sheriff faced him, hand near his revolver but eyes heavy with the weight of peace. Between them, the blacksmith stood unmoving, a bridge no man wanted to walk but none could ignore. The scarred man spoke first, his English jagged but firm. "My daughter lives, but not yet safe. Her blood is weak. She dies, then all die." The words rippled through the townsfolk. Murmurs broke out, anger mixing with fear. One man shouted, "We can't keep her here. She brings nothing but danger." The sheriff raised his hand for silence, then turned to the blacksmith. "What's your answer, Smith? You've sheltered her, you've tended her wounds. But if you mean to keep her, you tie this whole town's fate to her breath." The blacksmith's gaze shifted to the girl. She lay wrapped in a blanket, her chest rising and falling with shallow persistence. Her hand clutched a strip of cloth he had pressed to her wound, as though clinging to life itself. He turned back to the men before him, settlers and warriors alike. His silence spoke louder than any speech. He would not cast her out. The scarred leader's eyes narrowed. He barked something in his tongue, and his warriors answered with low chants, their voices rising like distant thunder. Then he faced the sheriff. "You fear war. I fear death of blood. We make deal. She lives, you live. She dies. Fire comes." The sheriff swallowed hard. He looked at the blacksmith, then at his own people, pale in the firelight. "That's no deal," he muttered. "That's a noose around all our necks." Still, he knew there was no choice. To reject it was to invite slaughter. To accept it was to stake the town's future on a girl's fragile heartbeat. The room fell silent. The only sound was the hiss of iron cooling in water, like the breath of the earth itself. At last the sheriff nodded. "Then we'll hold to it, but hear me, Smith. If she falters, this whole town falls with her. That's the weight you carry." The scarred leader stepped closer to the blacksmith, his scar gleaming in the glow. For a moment he seemed to measure the man's soul in silence. Then he gave a single nod. The deal was struck. But in that uneasy pact, everyone knew one truth. Peace bought in fire is peace that smolders, waiting to burn. The forge burned through the long night, its glow a fragile shield against the dark. The blacksmith tended the girl without rest, changing cloths, boiling water, and keeping the fire alive. Outside, warriors and townsfolk held an uneasy vigil, their eyes locked on each other, fingers twitching near triggers and bowstrings. Hours dragged. Every cough from the girl was met with silence so deep, it seemed the earth itself listened. The blacksmith's shoulders ached, his hands raw from work, but he did not stop. He had fought battles before, but never one so delicate. Never one where victory meant holding on to a single heartbeat. Near dawn, the fever broke. Sweat poured from the girl's brow, her breathing eased, and for the first time, her eyes opened. Clouded but alive. She whispered something in Navajo. The blacksmith didn't understand, but he knew the meaning. She was still here. The scarred leader stepped forward, his face unreadable. He knelt by his daughter, his hand brushing her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man who carried so much rage. She reached for him, then pointed weakly at the blacksmith. Her words came halting, but her tone was clear. She told her father who had kept her alive. The scarred man rose slowly. His gaze found the blacksmith's. For a long moment, the world balanced between them. The weight of vengeance and gratitude, war and peace. Then, in a voice rough as gravel, he spoke. "You carry iron, but your hands carry life." He turned to his warriors, barked a command. In unison, they lowered their weapons. The chants died away. The storm passed. The townsfolk, watching from the edge of the yard, exhaled as one. The sheriff holstered his revolver, his shoulders sagging with relief. The rancher who had led the mob lowered his eyes, ashamed. The scarred leader mounted his horse. With a final nod to the blacksmith, he spoke once more. "My daughter lives, so your town lives. Break this bond, and war returns." Then the war party wheeled as one and rode into the rising sun. Torches extinguished. leaving only hoofbeats fading into the dawn. The forge was quiet again. The girl slept peacefully now, her life no longer hanging by a thread. The blacksmith stood alone in the doorway, the weight of the night still heavy on his chest. He knew peace had been bought, but peace, like iron, was only strong if kept in the fire and hammered true. And though the warriors had gone, their words would echo in every corner of the town. Her life saved you. Her life binds you. The blacksmith turned back to the fire, his silhouette dark against the glow. The storm had passed, but the scars of it would never leave this land.